So first thing I want to talk about is this new deluxe edition set, this collector's edition set of Passion of the Christ. It's an expanded edition that just came out.
Yeah.
And several years ago you were on our show, and we spoke about the score at length. But what I really want to discuss with you is when a movie like this becomes a phenomenon, a global phenomenon, how does that affect the perception of your music with audiences throughout the world? What have you noticed in the years since that release, how your music has affected people?
Well, it's a great question. It covers many different layers of let me cover the layers that your question sort of hints at. The film obviously is a very different type of film, and I would say that initially when the film came out and it became such a huge hit worldwide, it really was rather, first of all, humbling and rather daunting in the fact that the film and the music affected people so deeply, and so there was that initial sort of disbelief or disconnect that, first of all, the film was so well received by many people and did so well and such commercial success that it was rather surprising, to say the very least, that the reaction was so dramatic. I traveled the world doing different concerts around that time, and it was interesting to see the very, very powerful reactions that everybody seemed to have, especially with the music, even away from the film. So that it was sort of an initial tidal wave of reaction, and then now over time, over these last 10 years, it still affects people. Literally, often I get emails, or I if I'm doing some music somewhere or conducting somewhere, invariably somebody will come up and mention to me that they love the music, and that they, in particular, there are a couple of scenes that they all sort of universally really mention to me. One of them being when, I guess, the most often remarked scene in the movie that people tell me about is the scene where Jesus is carrying the cross and Mary comes to him, and it's sort of a mother-son moment. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very interesting that 98% of people really mention that one scene. So I guess that one scene being very powerful, universally powerful scene, I think that the music also touched people. So it goes on, and that's why I'm so delighted that we were able to bring out this expanded edition for a 10-year anniversary, because it is still really seems to resonate with a lot of people. So it hasn't really died down that much.
Right. Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I recall you saying that, I mean, what an incredibly daunting task to score this particular film. No. But I think you said that your way in was kind of finding the musical voice for Mary.
That is correct. I literally was floundering, and I think we talked about this in the liner notes, and it's really, really true. I came to the project sort of in a weird way. I was very good old family friends with the producer, Steve McAveety, who brought me to the project. And once Mel took the leap of faith and hired me, it was very, very difficult. It was difficult finding the right tone for this movie. It was difficult, should it be a more traditional score? Should it be a very avant-garde contemporary score? And it was a very sort of bumpy road there to begin with for both Mel and I, because we were both trying to find our way and find out what would be the appropriate music. And for me, again, the crucial moment for me was kind of intellectually realizing at some point that the crux of the story in many ways was that from the point of view of Mary, of Christ's mother. Mm-hmm. And so once I intellectually kind of gleaned that she was really, with a lot of help from Mel, by the way, with a lot of discussion, I knew at a point that I had to kind of find her music or her theme. And that's really what happened. And once I, sort of through serendipity and through prayer and whatever you want to call it, once I found her music, it sort of opened the door to everything else. And the first time Mel heard it, he was very deeply touched by it. And so that was the key moment, was finding the voice of the movie, and it was really through her eyes.
Yeah. Well, speaking of directors, Rick actually wanted to ask you about your work with directors.
Sure.
I was just going to ask, when you're scoring a film, do you prefer to work with directors who are musically inclined and able to communicate in that respect, or do you prefer to work with directors who are less musically inclined and kind of just describe the emotion that they're looking for in a scene?
Well, that's a really good question, Rick. I like them both for different reasons. Give you an example. I've done a few movies with Ivan Reitman, and Ivan Reitman, he's a really, really good filmmaker and a lot of great films that he's done over the years. And Ivan's a very good musician, and quite frankly, has a really good ear. And sometimes he hears things that I don't even hear, but he's usually right. So that we sort of, when I work with Ivan, we have a musician-to-musician sort of feeling between each other, and we sort of have an unspoken language that we can sort of look at each other sometimes, and he'll give me a look, and I know sort of what he's feeling. Other directors that really are more sort of less musically inclined, but more sort of trustful, I think trusting of a composer and what they do. One comes to mind, John Gatins, who's a very good writer, director. I did a movie called Dreamer, which is a movie about a horse and a little girl. A very sweet film. And John Gatins was of kind of, apologetic about his lack of knowledge of music, but he would also know when a piece of music was right, and he'd sort of let me do really what I wanted to do, and he would throw it back to me. So they're all different. I can't say one's better than another. I just say that they're all a little bit different. In the case of Mel, he's very, very musically inclined. So he was pretty clear, when he'd hear something he liked or that he didn't like, we'd sort of experiment a lot, and then we'd come up with a new idea. So I guess I'd say I don't really prefer either one. They're just two sides of a coin, if you know what I mean. And you just deal with them in different ways, as it were.
I listen to interviews with pop singers or rock songwriters, and they say that when a song just comes to them, they know that that's going to be a special one. But the ones that they have to labor particularly intensively on, those are always a lot more kind of challenging and iffy in terms of their commercial prospects. But is there an equation for that with film composition?
I think it's very similar. I think sometimes you just get very lucky, literally. There's no science that I can find, at least in my working life. There just days or moments or mornings you wake up and you sort of have a tune in your head, and you start to work on it, and lo and behold, it really becomes something. And sometimes it's very effortless, but those times for me are a little more far and few between. I usually have to do a few dozen themes before I sort of happen upon one or two that I like. And it's always an interesting test for me. If I come up with something and I still like it after about 3 or 4 days, then I kind of, you know, and my hunch is usually right, that I usually have found something that you can hang your hat on, that becomes, you know, a theme for a movie. But it's always different. You know, sometimes you can overthink it too. You can be, I do it all the time. I guess artists do it all the time when you get caught up in the sort of the process of it all and thinking, well, it's got to be this or that, and sometimes that really hangs you up. And I really force myself sometimes just to put one note down, then followed by another note, and then a chord. And sometimes, you know, it's just the process of opening up the floodgates, as it were. But it's never the same. Every time out of the box seems like sometimes you get lucky and you get one right away, and other times it does take you a while to happen upon what the essence of a movie should be. Like with Mary's theme, you know, it was a process to find that. And once we found it, luckily Mel liked it. But it's always different.
Well, I would imagine that the common denominator among all of these scores that you've done is you need to stay true to your connection to the story, because everybody that works on a film is a storyteller, and I think that's the essential job, isn't it, for everyone?
True, absolutely. I think that I did a picture, I'll give you an example, I did a picture called Stonehurst Asylum this last year, and it was actually first called Eliza Graves, which I like the title better, Eliza Graves, but that was a really interesting movie that called for a lot of storytelling, because there was, in that particular movie, there was so much that was under the surface that wasn't obvious, that the music had to sort of guide you a little bit more, I think, than a normal situation that I've been in. Sometimes the music has to do that. Sometimes the music has to kind of help the viewer find the right feeling and the emotion of a scene. And sometimes, you know, it isn't readily apparent sometimes to a composer, I think, how to handle certain things. But invariably, you know, if you have enough experience and you sort of experiment enough, you can find your way. And a lot of times it's not what I would first think would be the way, but it ends up being the way. It's very elusive like that. Sometimes you just don't know until you're working with something and you just realize that you might be going right or left, and sometimes you have to just go up or down. I know this is a little abstract, but that's really what it is.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about experimentation, because I've been listening to your scores for two television miniseries that you just did recently in Houdini and Bonnie and Clyde. And I mean, they're phenomenal. I love. We both love what you do. But what struck me is there's it sounds very experimental in that it's not what you would automatically associate with music from that particular time period.
True.
It's not predictable at all. So what is the balance between experimentation and losing your way? I mean, there's always a danger of that, I would think.
Question. You know, that's a terrific question, and thank you for saying that. Those two scores in particular were so fun to create, because by design they were both meant to not, you know, really just retread the same kind of ground for a period piece like they both are. And in the case of Bonnie and Clyde, I'll talk about them both a little individually. Bonnie and Clyde, really, I dove into that one knowing that, you know, I had to have sort of a rural flavor to the music, and yet I wanted to make it a modern sort of reimagining of the music of the period, and using those instruments, but maybe using them in a little bit different way. And that was a really fun excursion for me in that regard, sort of taking that kind of music and putting a little this and a little of that, a little jazz influence, etc. In the case of Houdini, it was really a re-engineer because, one would approach something like that, you could go many ways. The most obvious way would have been to do a rather traditional score, sort of highlighting the period. But early in the process, the actual, I have to give it to the channel, the History Channel, and the executives there really wanted something really outside the box. So they were kind enough to sort of, let me just do it. And I remember the executive saying to me one day, just take it as far out as you can, and then we can always pull it back if we want to. And that's sort of what we did. So, early on, I kind of happened upon the idea of doing a Trent Reznor sort of influenced score because, in my opinion, Houdini was he's sort of a superhero, and that's sort of stuck in my mind. And so I thought, well, what would a really kind of metal-tinged electronica techno version of Houdini be? And that's really what then turned into that music, which is really, really aggressive. And I worked with a good friend of mine, Sebastian Aracha Morton, on that, who's a terrific record producer and writer. And really, we just kind of I think it raised a lot of eyebrows, to be honest with you. I think people were pleasantly surprised by something, that was completely different than they might have expected. And that's the fun for me, to do, especially lately, to do scores that when people hear them, they wouldn't necessarily equate them with me. And I think that's the most fun of doing that, is sort of being that chameleon and just, surprising people. And that's been a lot of fun.
How important are themes to you? I mean, we've just discussed the music that you composed to Mary and the musical voice that you gave to that particular character. But it seems to me that in recent years, or the past decade, we've kind of moved away from the thematic scores, and it feels more like ambiance a lot of times in these scores. And I kind of miss the themes.
I do too. Honestly, and we're not alone, by the way, Jamie. We're or Rick. I'm not sure which one. We're not alone. I think many of us composers bemoan the fact that there aren't the great themes being written these days. Now, by saying that, there are also a lot of filmmakers really don't want them right now, and that's okay. That's their prerogative. That really comes from the director down. But I love it. I always try to write a theme. I try to write or a motif or something that can reoccur and that people can kind of enjoy, sort of, if they hear it a few times. But yeah, they're just not as in vogue as they once were. But I also know, having done this a pretty long time, that all of it can change, with one or two movies that come out that are, let's say, huge, massive hits, and they have a theme. I think of Star Wars in '77. The convention had been for many years right before that time. Hank Mancini and a lot of the guys were doing, well, Hank was a great theme writer, but he's probably a bad example. But a lot of those sort of jazzy or rhythmic scores that were less theme and more sort of production. And then all of a sudden John came on the scene. He'd been on the scene for a while, but when he really hit with Star Wars and wrote that most incredible theme, and I think that influences us still, and it influenced certainly film music for a long time. So yeah, I just think it goes in waves, and I think that I think of Disney just recently. Disney always seems to have a great theme or a great song or two in their movies, and I think that is great, and you can see by the success they're having, whether it be Frozen or the Pixar movies, and there's always a nice song or theme or two that come out of those movies, and I think that's great. But I do agree, it's just it's right now what's in the wind, and a lot of scores these days seem to be more production and ambient and just beautiful production, by the way, and just so I think they're all great, and they all work great with films. I think Interstellar is a wonderful score.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's terribly thematic, but Hans is so clever with what he does. So I just think whatever your taste is, and it certainly comes from the director down.
Well, I mean, I can definitely say, and I'm speaking for Rick here too. I'm going to dare speak for him, but I'm pretty sure that I'm correct in this. I mean, when we hear a theme, we automatically latch on to it. We walked out of because we're best friends. We go to a lot of screenings together, so we actually saw No Strings Attached together. And when we walked out of that film, we were both raving about your score, and we bring it up all the time how much we love it. So
that's so nice of you to mention. That's my friend Ivan Reitman. We really had a good time on that. I mean, that's so sweet of you to mention that, and that did have kind of a nice tune. I was very proud of that because Ivan, when I work with Ivan, again, getting back to your initial question, Ivan loves themes, and he can be quite hard on a composer because he really demands that you come up with a good theme or two. And I told him this before, and it's the truth. He pulls out in me, certainly he pulls out some really, I think, some of my best work. I just think that No Strings was a fun one to do. It was. He really wanted that romantic theme. He wanted that payoff. So it was really fun. So there's a director who loves a good theme, and he's always sort of
gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, he's always kind of grinding me a little bit, but in a really good way. It's like I know he's doing it, and I know it can be better. I'll give you another example. I think the first thing we did was Hotel for Dogs, which is a movie that it did very well for what it is, a little family movie. But there's actually a good theme in there, too. I think he, for however he does it, he pulls out things from me that I probably wouldn't normally do. Like Draft Day, another example. I did Draft Day with him last year, and there's a nice sort of kind of stirring, heroic theme. You don't hear it much, but when you do hear it in those few scenes that we put it, I think it's kind of nice. So he for one is somebody that really pulls those good kernels out of me. So I'm thankful for that.
Well, if you'll permit me, just two more quick questions. We're such big fans of you, so we're savoring this opportunity. When thinking about career, when I look over your roster of credits, I'm struck by the versatility. And I know that everyone in the film industry, typecasting must be a concern. Is that something that has concerned you in your career?
Absolutely. We all, in our business, for whatever the reasons are, we all get typecast. I think actors get typecast. Everybody gets rather typecast. I think it's just the nature of our business. I think that people, if you do 3 or 4 things in a row, perhaps, that are of a kind, I think people, maybe it's just sort of in the human psyche, that they sort of equate you with some type of thing. And it's, it is a tough thing to sort of battle that. There's no question. Michael Keaton comes to mind, for instance. Michael has a breakout role this year in Birdman, and he's terrific. I think I would put it this way, I think artists always have to try to reinvent themselves. You just have to, because, if you get too stale or you do too many things in a row that are of a kind and you don't try to change it up or make yourself sort of looked at again in a different light, I think you're doing a disservice to yourself, really, and I think that you're also limiting your ability to have longevity. And I think longevity is key in Hollywood. There are actors, actresses, and writers and directors that maybe have, their moment in the sun, and then they're sort of a flash in the pan. But I think the ones that can have longevity and stand the test of time, I think that's, to me, the most successful career. I'll give you a little fun insight. Sometimes, I love old sci-fi movies or B movies, and I love the actors that we've all seen a million times in these different roles, be they television or film, and I get a kick out of looking at some of these, let's say character actors, for instance, on IMDb, and when you see the amount of 300 credits or 400 TV and films, to me that's success. It's sort of being able to really, navigate the waters of change and really morph into, different people at different times or different artists at different times, and that's what I'm trying to do too.
Well, you have done it, and I'm sure it must be.
I do it consciously. I really do, because I think it's more fun that way too.
Well, it must be very challenging too, because there were points, particularly at the beginning of your career, where I would imagine that you could have easily have been pigeonholed as the Disney guy or the comedy guy. Were there times when you had to kind of back off from job opportunities to wait for the right one to come along?
Yes, absolutely. Some of the best advice I've ever gotten was from agents that I've had over the years, and one in particular, there was a period of time where I had just done Liar, Liar, and I was doing Bruce Almighty. I was doing all those kind of wonderful big comedies, and this gentleman told me once, we were having the discussion about this, and what to do and what not to do, and how to not get pigeonholed, and he was very, really, really had some great advice for me. And he said, look, then just say no for a while, until there's something that we really feel could be a great canvas for you to do something different. And we actually did that. And I remember kind of regretting it at the time, where literally I think 6 months went by and I didn't. That's a long period for me not to work, because I'm normally love working, and I love diving into new things. And I remember vividly that it was kind of a tough time, but there was a film that came up, and I forget exactly which one it was, but it was something different. And he was right. It was something different. I remember I did it, and then all of a sudden I was not just the comedy guy. I was doing, this and that. I think Sin City was coming in right around that time. Got to meet Robert Rodriguez. So a lot of wonderful things changed a bit, and still do. Sometimes when you say no, it's the best thing you can do.
Yeah. This question for you. This is the fun one that we like to ask every composer we welcome on the show. If you were to recommend 3 to 5 film scores from other composers which you feel are essential, what would those titles be?
God, that's such a tough one. I think you've asked me that before. That one's hard for me, but I can just tell you a few off the top of my head. The first two gentlemen that I would always go to would be John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith, because they're my two favorites. I think I would say John's either the first Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back would be essential. I think Jerry Goldsmith, believe it or not, Total Recall for me, for Jerry, was and still is one of those scores that literally I can look at the notes on the page and while I'm listening and I still can't figure it out. It's so good and so rich and so difficult and so complex and yet simple too. That's the funny thing. You look at it sometimes on the page and you go, it's just the whole orchestra's playing in octaves, but it's one of those things. Then I would probably, maybe third choice might be, just because I love Eric Wolfgang Korngold. I love his scores. I loved the one that I was influenced by for Cutthroat Island was Captain Blood, or one of those. And Korngold to me was just the ultimate. God, he bridged he was a classical composer that ended up just doing these amazing scores. I'd have to throw in, by the way, this is a runner-up for number 3.
Okay.
It would be Hugo Friedhofer, Best Years of Our Lives.
Okay.
And that may not be the most obvious choice, but for us composer types, man, that's a hard one to beat. That one or To Kill a Mockingbird. Okay, I'll throw
To Kill a
Homer in there
Mockingbird.
too.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, all right, let's throw those two in there too, because to me they're so quintessentially American.
Yes.
And just
yes.
break your heart. They're just, oh my God. I cry every time I hear To Kill a Mockingbird or I hear Best Years of Our Lives. It is, and for those of your listeners who haven't heard Best Years of Our Lives, please listen to it. It's really spectacular.
Wow. Well, we love that. We love those kinds of recommendations. So, and we love you, and we're so appreciative of you giving us your time today.
My pleasure. I love you guys. I love the show. And anytime you want to chat, call me.